for the invitation. It's a huge honor for me to participate in this prestigious forum. And I really value both Charlotte, your shepherding of this group, and also Ken's Herculean task of encouraging the discipline of numismatics in Australia and certainly on the East Coast. So it's been a great encouragement to me over the years in very many different ways. I want to start tonight by noting a quote by the Russian novelist Ivan Turgenev, who writes in 1862 that the drawing shows me at one glance what might be spread over 10 pages in a book. And this is particularly relevant for numismatics, where obviously physical space on the surface of a coin is extremely limited and thus generally reserved for iconographic depictions with short epigraphic inscriptions. And I'm no doubt preaching to the choir here, but the idea that ancient coins are merely instruments of commerce is really something that needs to be abandoned. They're miniature texts of immense linguistic value. Their inscriptions, though they're often limited to a few words or abbreviated forms, represent some very significant widespread examples of written Greek in antiquity. So I will attempt to examine a selection of these inscriptions on coinage to serve as a compressed yet really potent witness to the grammar, morphology, and syntax of ancient Greek in a couple of different ways. And what better way to feast our eyes on the beauty of ancient coinage than to begin with this gold stater from the American Numismatic Collection. First off, this is really a two-pronged approach, and I'm attempting to serve a dual purpose in our discussion tonight. First, I'll argue that ancient Greek coinage, and specifically their inscriptions, offer an invaluable resource for teaching and learning of Greek. That it goes for grammar, for syntax, all within the context of material culture. Second, I also want to push the boundaries a little bit more on the dimension of the way in which inscriptions constitute really an underutilized but very much a productive archive and avenue for scholarly work, not just lexicography, but historical linguistics, especially in areas of reconstruction of dialectical variation, titular patterns, semantic nuance, and other elements like that. But I will try to divide my comments along those two lines. But in terms of for the students, Greek inscriptions on coins provide a unique and very much an enriching learning experience. They provide a tangible and also an authentic link to the ancient world. And that makes language more real and it makes it more memorable. The visual pairing of a word and an image obviously reinforces vocabulary and grammar through association, and not to mention the engagement and the interactivity that something like this brings. And that's all aside from this kind of quasi-spiritual experience of actually handling an ancient coin that in one moment of time collapses centuries into that single tactile moment. And, I've had experiences myself or with other learners where, there's very much this qualia-like experience. So you're not just holding a piece of stamped metal, you're touching the same object that has passed through the hands of merchants and soldiers and rulers and commoners, although probably not the gold stater through the hands of commoners, but nonetheless, 2 millennia of transmission of artifacts, and therefore the coin becomes this vessel of memory, still bearing linguistic imprints. And that, not just linguistic imprints, but also divine symbols and imperial titles that once proclaimed this power and the piety and the prosperity of of a regime or an emperor. And there's this kind of humbling and quiet awe in realizing that this small little thing in your hand has outlived empires, survived war and decay, and now rests in your palm as this kind of direct material link to antiquity. And so for students, this is now more than just a language exercise or memorizing a paradigm. It's a moment of almost like this communion with the past, where language and history and their own humanity converges in this point of interaction with this small piece of stamped metal. And so all that to say is that when we situate language within its historical cultural context, it has a much more significant and profound effect on the reader or the viewer. It also, of course, engages with the interdisciplinarity of coins. And this is a big thing for when it comes to fostering critical thinking, as students decipher the abbreviations or the case endings or syntax, often in this highly compressed form, and they explore their meanings through an interactive object-based learning or similar scenario. So there's lots to go for when it comes to the student realm of this material. For scholars, the inscriptions, of course, are a rich archive of linguistic information. There's regional variation, a record of basically the public performance of language in antiquity. It's obviously a direct witness to grammar in use in the real world, and illuminates patterns of titulature and political rhetoric, while also contributing to our understanding of dialects and also semantics, the way in which those terms are used in various ways. All of that beautifully is mapped across time and space. And so you have a scenario where a corpus of material, a form of material culture, not only is a effective for the student, but then also highly valuable for scholarly investigations into history or many other areas, that some of which we'll touch on this evening. One of the most vivid ways to introduce students, I think, to the origins of the Greek alphabet is through this 3rd century coin minted in Tyre under the regime of Philip. That's RPC 86505. The coin's reverse depicts a foundational cultural myth. This is Cadmus, the legendary Phoenician hero on the right-hand side, who presents a tablet inscribed with the alphabet to a group of 4 Greeks. And the iconography visually narrates the transmission of writing from Phoenicia to the Greek world, an innovation that, of course, shapes various things in the Mediterranean. The coin itself embodies this linguistic encounter. And so even though the main inscription is in Latin, and you can see here col, which is Colonia, Tiro, Metropoli, at the colony Tyre, metropolis, indicating Tyre's status as a Roman colony. It also features a Greek inscription directly beneath the figures. So you have Eli, short for Elines, that is the Greeks, and then you also have Cadmus. So this bilingualism not only reflects the multicultural environment of Roman Phoenicia, but also allows students or readers or whoever to see actual Greek letters in context stamped on metal rather than printed on a piece of paper. Remarkably, some Tyrian issues also include inscriptions in Phoenician. They're often compressed identifiers, normally an initial letter of the king's name or numerical year. And so therefore you have at least 3 writing systems interacting on the single medium in a single location. So this shekel of Azamilkis includes a Phoenician ayin, the initial letter of the king's name, Osmilik. In that particular example, you've got the owl standing head facing, and the crook and the flail in the background. And then you've got the 5 lines, and then the ayin, and then the 2 lines. And this is indicating the 7th. It's a date and the first initial of the king's name. But the point is, it's in Phoenician. And then, of course, more famously, you have the tetradrachms of the Tyrian shekels, minted from 126 BCE to 56 AD, of great fame for being potentially the type of coinage that Judas receives 30 pieces of for his betrayal. But you obviously have the Melkart on the obverse, the eagle standing with the right foot up on the prow of a ship, the palm branch, etc. But the point is that in between the eagle's legs is the Phoenician bait. And then you also have, of course, Tiru Iras ki Asilu, Tyre, holy and inviolable. And it's year number 2. So this coin and all the history behind it is really something that serves as a powerful artifact for exploring the Greek alphabet's transmission, the politics of language, the multilingual world of antiquity. And so this is something that can be used and integrated in various ways, even at in the very first encounter, some even before one encounters something as simple as learning the alphabet. A common grammatical feature found on Hellenistic coinage is obviously the genitive case, typically used to indicate possession or association. So, for example, you have this example here. So you have Vasileos, and you have Selevku. Selevku translates literally as, or Vasileos Selevku, of King Seleucus, genitive construction that identifies the issuing authority or the figure honored by the coin. And so this formulaic use of the genitive is pervasive across royal coinage, provides students with repeated contextual exposure to Greek case endings, particularly os and u, found in the 3rd declension, 2nd declension nouns, respectively. But beyond grammatical comprehension, these coins also offer practical familiarity with something as simple as the unsealed script, which, to my surprise, students, even very good students that have had a lot of, a couple of years of Greek, still don't know their unseals, which is amazing. But there you go, coins to the rescue. Majuscule writing style is obviously common in inscriptions and manuscripts. And here we have condensed, sometimes there's ligatured lettered forms on coins, and that can help students also recognize and decipher non-standard orthographic representations of familiar words. So reading coin inscriptions, again, reinforces the morphological awareness, but also improves paleographic skill, and also even strengthens syntactical intuition, all within an authentic historical medium, the size of a coin that you can fit 10 of in your hand. So it's quite remarkable in that respect. Here we have a Bactrian coin with obviously Greek on one side and Acrosti on the other. I'll focus on the obverse. Here we have a coin. You can see I've highlighted here, Ipostratu. That's the name of the individual. And then we have in the genitive, Vasileos, Megalou, Sotiros. So the Greek legend, Vasileos, Megalou, Sotiros, Ipostratu, can be translated something like of King Hippostratus, the great savior. And that phrase that's preserved on this coin offers a concise and rather elegant, in my opinion, example of noun-adjective agreement in Greek, especially within the epigraphic and royal titular contexts. Vasileos is obviously genitive singular, masculine noun, and is the head noun in that genitive chain, and governs the remaining epithets that follow. Megalou, also, of course, genitive singular, masculine form of megas, great, and functions as the attributive adjective, modifying Vasileos, and agrees, obviously, and this is the grammatical point that students need to remember, agree in case, number, and gender. with the other. Sotiros, clearly genitive singular masculine of sotir, and is used here either appositionally or as a second attributive noun, which again is common in these epithets, and again agrees in case and gender, obviously. Ipostrato is the proper name of Ipostrato, genitive of the proper name Ipostratos, and that obviously completes the phrase denoting the individual to whom the title applies. And again, it conforms to genitive masculine singular form and maintaining this concord with the governing noun. So again, the inscription exemplifies this grammatical principle in Greek, where adjectives and modifiers have to agree. And what better way to do this than an actual real example for students to engage with? And it's very easy to read. It's not difficult paleographically. But again, this kind of consistency of the formulaic genitive chain that's typical in this context, particularly Hellenistic, well, also in Hellenistic coinage, where the royal authority, divine favor are all condensed into these neat little epithets that accompany the ruler's name. The use of prepositions in ancient Greek and the legends that we find on coins, often overlooked, provides rich evidence of political structure, administrative language, and even spatial or other types of relationships. One example in this respect is the preposition epi, which, depending on context, can mean on, in the time of, or even in the reign of. On Roman provincial coinage, epi frequently introduces the name of an official under whose governance the coin is struck. So, for instance, in this inscription, we have Tiberio, Caesari, Sevasto, and then you have epi highlighted here on the coin in green. And then you have the abbreviation cor, short for Corneliu, and then lipu. The phrase is best understood as to Tiberius Caesar Augustus under the authority of Cornelius Lupus. And here epi governs the genitive phrase Corneliu lipu. And that makes the Cornelius Lupus, the Roman provincial governor, proconsul, active at the time of minting. So this usage reflects administrative hierarchy and the formal expression of obviously imperial oversight. The reverse inscription, Synclitu Krites, and then kappa ipsilon, translates to the Senate, the Cretans of Cyrenaica. Again, further demonstrates how nominal groupings, whether ethnic or regional populations, are grammatically coordinated to indicate allegiance, dedication, or civic identity. In this case, the dative to the Senate is paired with the nominative krites, the genitive of the Cretans of Cyrenaica, which obviously functions as this digatory formula. So together, those inscriptions offer, I think, valuable training and reading embedded prepositional phrases and in a formal syntactical context, while it also reinforces case governance, regional titulature, and of course the linguistic coding of imperial structures on material artifacts themselves. So there's a broad range of grammatical features on coins, and one which I think is very interesting are participles. When it comes to authority to mint, this was regulated in this period, at least by magistrates in local civic administration in the Roman world, overseen by provincial governors operating under the authority of the emperor, who could, of course, intervene if necessary. So when Vespasian revoked the autonomy that had been granted to Achaia by Nero, including the right to mint their civic coinage, this is a good example of precisely that. So previously, in November of 66, Nero grants these extensive privileges to the Greek cities, effectively eliminating their tax burden and allowing them a lot of significant self-governance, including the right to mint coinage. Now, Vespasian recognized the detrimental economic effect for the empire of that kind of autonomy, and so he rescinds the privileges. As a result, the production of civic coinage was also halted, and permission to mint was eventually restored during the reign of Domitian, who re-established some civic freedoms, including the minting of local coinage. So the resumption of minting local coinage in those cities was obviously enthusiastically embraced by the local cities, and this coin is precisely an example of that. It's a lot of text on a small space, and so I'll just highlight a few things to look at, but I've highlighted it all for you just so you've got it there. But so this permission to mint is evidenced in RPC 13111. It's dated to 62, 63 CE. It's a coin of Ancyra in Phrygia, and the obverse depicts Nero and Poppia as these confronting busts. And then we have the inscription. It starts up here with Neron. So Neron, Kaiser, Sevastos, Poppaea, Sevasti. So that's Nero, Caesar, Augustus, Poppaea, Augusta. And then the reverse has Zeus standing there with the anchor and the scepter, accompanied by the inscription Ulasena, and then Antipator, Uleon. Hopefully that's coming up. Here we go. Uleon. And then we have Ankyreon, Etsamenu, and then the abbreviation Taf and then Vasilou. So that translates as Volacena, proconsul of the Julians of the Ancyrans at the request of Tiberius Vasilios Ephor. And so the proconsul is identified as Volacena, magistrate as Vasilos. And then you have this genitive singular aorist middle participle of eteo, which means one who has requested. There we go. So the Greek verb eteo, meaning to ask or to request, is not exclusively linked to the concept of benefaction, but it is often used in contexts where a request for a favor or aid is made. And so the usage can range from ordinary requests to more formal petitions, including those involving benefaction, like we see in this example here. Then we have final example here before I move on to talk about another dimension of this material. This is a coin of Antiochus Epiphanes IV, and has some interesting things to contribute to our understanding of vocabulary. So here's the reverse of the coin. You can see the inscription Vasileos, Antiochou, King Antiochus, or of King Antiochus, Theou, Epiphanos, God manifest, Nikephoru, bringer of victory, and then we have Zeus seated, holding Nike, with then also a little mint mark there. So a couple of interesting things, actually a lot that we could say about this, but I'll just condense it to a few. You've got a similar kind of genitive chain structure that we saw before, a hallmark of this type of these titles and inscriptions on coins, where everything agrees, genitive singulars all the way through. And you have similar points, I guess, could be made, as we mentioned before. But the second thing, more importantly, that I want to say is the density, the morphological density and the economy. So just in a few words, the inscription conveys at least three things. You've got royal identity, basileos. You've got divine status, the Theou, God manifest. And then you've got military success or ideological claim, nikephoru, victory bearing. So the royal dimension, the divine dimension, and the military dimension, all within a couple of millimeters of coin space, demonstrates how these coin legends functions as microcosms or microtexts that really densely encode grammatical structure, but also they're coding the political theology of imperial self-preservation for their readers. You also have then, drilling down a little bit further, the lexical and semantic significance. So Epiphanes, it is a charged, theologically charged title, suggesting divine presence or manifestation. It's a word that is later echoed in early Christian literature, epiphania in something like the book of Titus in chapter 2. And then you have obviously nikephoros, a compound adjective that reveals this kind of very productive morphological system on coins of economy. So the grammar here is not just formal, it performs the ideology. The king is not merely Antiochus, but of the victorious God manifest king. Take that, prestigious academic titles. It doesn't get much higher than that. But it's a statement of divine kinship packed into this nominal structure. And it illustrates how Greek on coinage carries semantic weight, but also political function, contributing to sort of the big picture of the language as a system of power and legitimacy, as well as identity. So in sum, taking a step back from this, the coin really compresses the kind of royal theology, so to speak, of this noun-adjective agreement within the genitive syntax into a public micro-inscription that speaks to something way beyond itself. And it shows, I think this is a great example, how coins were not just obviously monetary tools, but they're grammatical artifacts that really project the identity through the structured formulaic forms of Greek that we find. So there's more than enough there to keep you going for a long time with any group of students, and therefore, you could multiply all of those by about 1,000 easily by just turning to the next coin and discussing and looking at similar kinds of things. So that could be reproduced, and hopefully that's given you some picture of how, or some ideas of how that might be profitable to pursue. But the other side, so to speak, of the, I can't say of the coin, but I will. The other side of the coin is not just the student dimension, but also the scholarly endeavor to grapple with and incorporate critical numismatic material into the emerging discipline of Greek lexicography. And one of the people to do that early on was Passau's Wörterbuch. There's a lot to be said. I won't go into detail here, of course. Time doesn't permit it. But a century later, also the pioneering linguistic work of Presiker and Kissling's Wörterbuch drew on numismatic material, as did the revisions and supplements. Now, although later studies have occasionally drawn on that material evidence of the numismatic record, with some notable exceptions, I should say, characteristically, this material is neglected in technical discussions of Greek lexicography or philology. Within the broad-ranging and interdisciplinary fields of ancient culture and history, Christopher Haugigo, who was my first teacher for numismatics, he attributes the marginalization of numismatic material to, quote, special problems attached to their interpretation. And he's there referring to issues of technique and method, but also concerns around authenticity and other matters. So it's complicated. I don't think it's prohibitive, of course, but he's noting there maybe some of the reasons why people have been a bit timid to make those connections into the numismatic world. One of the recent editions of BDAG contains 54 references to coins. Can you believe it? So many. But only 5 of those references have any bearing whatsoever on the actual meaning of the lexemes themselves. The majority of the references are used in relation to terms that relate to money. So there's an entry for argirion. Clearly, that's a term related to money, or asarion or denarion or whatever it might be, but doesn't actually use coins themselves to assist in the interpretive process of the lexical entry. Or there might be generic references, literary references with only very tangential relevance, or there's personal names or proper nouns that are relevant for etymological investigation, which again has perhaps limited lexicographic value. So there's 5 entries, though, that do attempt to constructively involve numismatic material in the lexical entry, and all of them are really, unfortunately, sadly, insufficient. So one of them, ethnarchis, the ethnic head, does specifically state numismatic contribution, but only refers readers to a secondary reference. And then when you have a look at that reference, it doesn't attest any contribution really to the semantic definition. So it's kind of firing a blank on that one. Evergretis, the benefactor entry, mentions coins in the summary and then cites 2 pieces of secondary literature, but doesn't actually indicate what contribution this has, if any, to the semantic domain that's under discussion. The word for day, imera, is glossed as a day appointed by a human court, apparently on the basis of a coin. This is actually an amulet, which turns out to be hopelessly anachronistic for the concern of the entry. And there's others. There's a one on Neokoros, the temple keeper. It simply notes also on coins, yet doesn't note any of the requisite detail that can actually contribute to understanding that lexeme. It was actually quite helpful in one respect, because it then gave me these 5 unfortunate uses of coins in this dictionary, 5 good ideas for writing articles. So that's the upshot. But then 5th, the word victory, Niki, is noted as being an attribute of the emperor on coinage. But again, there's no detail. There's nothing really to suggest that it contributes meaningfully to the semantic domain. So that's kind of the context for the reason I engaged in research project on a few years ago on numismatics and Greek lexicography, but there's still just so much more to do. That book was really just half of it was on method, and then the other half was on what I saw as cogent examples of the task. And the task of lexicography, of course, is not an easy one. It involves the tricky question of how many and which senses should be distinguished for a specific lexical term, and in which cases should a sense be assigned to another existing sense in terms of its division and subdivision, and there's debates about that. What are the relationships between senses for the polysemous lexical items, and should those relationships be described in dictionaries? There's a debate about what we're actually doing, sort of a crisis. How do you map the multidimensionality of polysemy onto a 2-dimensional traditional dictionary entry? It's very difficult. And sometimes there's glaring omissions, like this one, RPC 2512, with this word ktistis, which on coinage is all over the place over hundreds of years, used consistently to refer to the founding of a city. and yet in other dictionaries, especially those used by New Testament interpreters, ktistis is very similar to ktizo, which is the word for create, and therefore in the one instance in which this word occurs in the New Testament, ktistis is translated as creator rather than founder, which again, I think founder is easily demonstrable from the numismatic material. So we could go on in various respects, but I want to just, I think, conclude with one quote and a couple of comments and then wrap it up. In 1969, John Hartman observed that without the study of numismatic epigraphy, it's almost impossible to study the stylistic evolution of the Greek or Roman alphabets or the dating of some important changes in letter forms, which can only be pinpointed by the study of ancient coin inscriptions. And this is methodologically where numismatics is light years ahead of almost every other form of material culture in that it has a chronological framework which is often very tight. Not just the regnal period, but sometimes the year or the portion of the year, not always. But that is very helpful, and it has a location, normally time and place. What more could you want for evidence of language? And the papyri, the inscriptions give you an element of that, but not often both. And so we could unpack this, and if we had more time, we could talk about the transition of from archaic to classical Greek in terms of the letter forms. But you might kind of shrug and say, well, who cares? Why does that even matter? Well, since you asked and you've taken your gloves off, we could say that coins anchor the evolution of writing in time and space, like I mentioned before. And they're one of the few sources that we can date precisely. And that's obviously a huge benefit. Coins, again, show that Greece wasn't one Greece, but many. The fact that Sicyon uses a san while Athens uses a sigma, or that some cities clung to the digamma for centuries after others dropped it, tells us something significant. Language in the ancient world was fragmented, it's contested, it's politically meaningful, and coinage preserves that fragmentation in the physical form that it takes. And studying it shows how cultural identity, tradition, and power played out in script choices. So again, there's lots of other things here that we could say, and I could go on and talk about other dimensions of this, but I would really love for us to have a few minutes for conversation as well. We could talk about point 2, the adoption of Ionic alphabet across the Aegean. We could talk about the development of Roman uncial and capital scripts in the 1st century BC to the 3rd century CE, or the rise of the lunate script in Greek with the sigma and the epsilon. But again, these are things that help trace the earliest public and administrative adoption of forms that basically later dominate the uncial and minuscule writing forms, or even the regional variations. And this is where it obviously gets quite interesting. So coins from Cappadocia or Bactria sometimes retain archaic or idiosyncratic forms like non-standard alphas, long stem rows or tufts with extended right arms or whatever it might be. I've got a nice little banding chart that has been created to map that. But again, numismatics is uniquely capturing those regional letter forms and variations, informing the geography and the evolution of the script. So I think Hartman's comment is more than vindicated on the whole. And in conclusion, I here will just briefly mention the one of the earliest full Greek sentences known from coinage, and that is, of course, Phanos imi sema, I am the seal of Phanos, exemplifies how early coins function not only economically but also linguistically. It's using the first person speech, genitive of possession. It's all compressing this down into this meaningful form for communication. So like the other examples that we've looked at above, I think that this demonstrates that coinage is not just an instrument of exchange, but it's a durable microcosm that compresses that linguistic, cultural, and even ideological structure of the producer's time into a few potent words. And whether that's the titles, or, with all these genitive chains, whether it's the embedding the imperial authority, through the prepositional phrases, or the regional orthographic variants of the coins that offer a uniquely constrained yet expressive domain for the real world use of that expression. That's what the coins deliver. So to come back to our first point, for students and for scholars, the students' coins provide this tactile visual entry point into the complexity of grammar and morphology and syntax, and making those abstract rules tangible, memorable. And obviously for scholars, coins represent an underutilized, in my opinion, archive of datable public Greek in actual use. And it's essential for reconstructing the diversity and development of the language across time and space. So I think ultimately the grammar of coins is not only formal and theoretical, but it's performative. Coin inscriptions are encoding power and proclaiming divine favor, or projecting identity, and therefore, to steal someone else's phrase, they're monuments in miniature, a text whose very brevity shapes their linguistic and historic force. And I think I'm among friends here, I think, mostly. So to ignore them, I think, would be foolish, at least in the study of history and language and culture. Is to ignore them is really to leave unread some of the most valuable and immediate insights that we can derive from these influential sources. Thanks.